Alaska. The mere mention of the word conjures up images of beautiful coastlines, majestic peaks, and lots of snow. One also thinks back to the time of the Great Gold Rush, when miners headed into the Klondike by the thousands. Of course, the gold rush is long in the past, but there's a place in Alaska where one can still enjoy the scenery and get some of the gold rush flavor, the legendary White Pass and Yukon route. Our visit begins in the southeastern community of Skagway. Downtown Skagway is a National Historic District and has changed little from the Gold Rush days. The buildings have been carefully restored, and the town is full of old-time charm. Although the land that would eventually become Skagway was staked out in 1887, the area did not really grow in population until gold was found north of here near Dawson, Yukon in 1896. Prospectors flooded the region, with most heading to nearby Dyea, which was 6 miles from Skagway, where they climbed the established Chilkoot Trail. It was a brutal climb, yet prospectors still came by the thousands. In 1898, a group of investors from London, England started construction on the White Pass and Yukon route, the railroad that we'll be riding today. The railroad eventually climbed to the summit of White Pass, which is now the border between the United States and Canada, and then it passed through a small part of British Columbia before reaching Whitehorse, Yukon. The White Pass carried freight and passengers until 1982, when a major shipper along the line closed, which in turn forced the railroad to cease operations. During the years that the railroad was closed, Skagway started to become a stop for cruise ships touring Alaska's Inside Passage. In 1988, the railroad reopened between Skagway and White Pass to cater to this new passenger trade. Over the years, more of the railroad has been reopened to serve the ever-increasing passenger demand generated by the cruise ships. The White Pass is narrow gauge, with 3 feet between the rails, instead of the usual standard gauge, which has a width of 4 feet 8 1/2 inches. Narrow gauge was cheaper to build and can snake around much tighter curves than standard gauge track, which, as we'll see, is an advantage here. Since the White Pass has never connected with any other railroad, being narrow gauge has never been a problem. The locomotives are unique to the railroad, having been custom built for the White Pass. The 90 series shovel-nose diesels were built between 1954 and 1966 by General Electric. 101 series diesels were built between 1969 and 1971 by the Montreal Locomotive Works. Number 114 was built in 1982 by Montreal's successor, the Bombardier Company. The White Pass also has 2 steam locomotives that are used on occasion. Number 69 was built in 1908 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works, and number 73 built in 1947 by Baldwin. Number 73 was the last steam locomotive built for the White Pass. We'll start our trip on the White Pass in Yukon at the downtown depot. We depart Skagway at sea level and stay on mostly level track as we pass through town, which, as we see, is a quite rare thing on this railroad. On the left, we see some of the coaches waiting their next train. Many are old-timers, being built in the 1890s, while some have been constructed fairly recently, but made to blend in with the old-time flavor of their older sisters. We're passing the White Pass maintenance shops where all of the equipment is serviced and overhauled. On the left is the Skagway River. We'll soon part company with the river and begin our climb to the summit of White Pass. In the 20 miles between Skagway and White Pass, the railroad climbs nearly 3,000 feet with grades that approach 4%. At Rocky Point, we're 7 miles from Skagway, but have already climbed to 637 feet above sea level. Looking out to the left, we can see all the way to Skagway and beyond it to the Lynn Canal. Far below us was the White Pass Trail, which later became a very rough toll road. One can see how the railroad greatly speeded up transportation from the port in Skagway to the gold fields. Across the valley, we see the U.S. Customs building on the Klondike Highway. The sign below the Customs House was put there in the early days of the railroad. George Buchanan was a Detroit businessman who helped sponsor trips to Alaska for disadvantaged youth. The sign was put there by a group of kids from Cleveland, Ohio, as their way of saying thanks. We're passing by the siding at Clifton. In the early days of the railroad, a track crew actually lived up here. Today, it's still a handy place for the track crew to pull into the siding to let our train go by. We're at milepost 10.2 at Black Cross Rock. It was here in 1898 that a construction accident sent this large boulder down the hill to land on 2 workers, who are still buried under it to this day. In the distance, we see Bridal Veil Falls. We're starting to get into some snow. Our visit was in May, just after the tourist season had started. This area had an unusually late, heavy snowfall, so we're treated to rare winter-looking views of the White Pass route. With the late season snowfall, the White Pass had to contend with snowslides. Here, we passed through a slide that had been causing problems by repeatedly covering the tracks.
See you.
We're passing slippery rock, where workers blasted out the railway line while hanging from guy wires. We're at an elevation of 2,275 feet and one of the most spectacular parts of the line at Tunnel Mountain, where the valley is about 1,000 feet below the track. Here we see a train following on the lower level as the train ahead of it passes by on the upper one. We're at Inspiration Point, another place where one can see all the way back to Skagway, nearly 16 railroad miles away. Below us is Dead Horse Gulch. In the winter of 1897, hundreds of pack animals died, killed by gold-crazed drivers who literally worked the animals to death over the rugged terrain. In some cases, the horses were known to jump off the cliff to escape their brutal masters. At Gulch, the train passes Old Bridge number 18A, which has long been one of the icons of the White Pass. It was abandoned in 1969 when freight trains became too heavy for it, with the railroad instead going over a new bridge just down the line. train is nearing the summit at White Pass, which, while only 20 miles from Skagway, is 2,856 feet higher. White Pass is the border between Alaska in the United States and British Columbia in Canada. When the railroad was in year-round operation, there was a station and customs office here. White Pass is the destination of many trains from Skagway. The locomotives will run around the train on the siding, and then the train will return to Skagway. Our train, however, will continue on north to Fraser, British Columbia.
Dispatch 943 to Ryan Fraser.
43 to Brian Thompson. Brian Thompson. Line is the side, John Jackson. Roger, thanks, sir.
We're arriving in Fraser, where our train will pick up passengers from the waiting tour buses and return to Skagway. At Fraser, we see the old steam locomotive water tank that was enclosed in this building to prevent the water from freezing. Fraser is also where Canadian Customs inspects the train. Our diesels run around the train, then will return us to Skagway.
Dispatch, knowledge White Pass 24, departing Fraser, dispatch. Enough to came off that placard.
Our train from Fraser is once again nearing the station at White Pass, which was indeed a winter wonderland during our visit. The return trip to Skagway is every bit as spectacular as the trip up the hill to White Pass.
Okay, sure.
As we near Skagway, we encounter a black bear running down the tracks. The area along the railroad abounds in wildlife. We're arriving in Skagway. It's been a great trip, one that the passengers will remember for years to come. The White Pass in Yukon offers one of the greatest train rides in the world, and people come again and again to ride this incredible railroad. If you've never been here, then the White Pass and Yukon route should be high on your list of places to visit.